October 30th, 1942. The Mediterranean, north of the Nile Delta. For 16 hours, the British destroyer HMS Petard and 3 other escorts have hunted a submerged German U-boat with depth charges, more than 200 of them, cracking her pressure hole and finally forcing her after dark to the surface, crippled and unable to hold trim. Her German crew abandoned ship without fully scuttling her or destroying what is inside. 2 Royal Navy sailors strip off their uniforms and swim across the cold, dark water to the sinking hull. They climb inside a submarine that is actively flooding, smash open a locked cabinet with a pistol, and begin passing books and papers up through the conning tower to a third man waiting above, a 16-year-old canteen assistant who technically should not have been anywhere near the boarding party at all. Moments later, the submarine gives way beneath them and goes down fast. The 2 men inside drown. Their bodies are never found. What they had already handed up before the water took them, plain paper rather than any weapon or piece of hardware, would end a 10-month intelligence blackout that had let German U-boats sink Allied shipping almost at will, and it would do more lasting damage to the U-boat war than most single naval battles managed in a year. At the start of February 1942, the German Navy had introduced a 4th encryption rotor into the Enigma machines used by its Atlantic U-boat fleet, converting a cipher British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had been reading, with interruptions since 1941, into one they suddenly could not read at all.
The new network, which the Germans called Triton and the British codenamed Shark, went dark to Allied intelligence entirely, and it stayed dark for the next 10 months. That blind period, remembered at Bletchley as the Shark Blackout, coincided with some of the worst months of the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Convoys that had once been rerouted around known U-boat patrol lines using decrypted signals now sailed with no such warning. Wolf packs reformed largely unseen, and Allied shipping losses in the worst months of 1942 ran to roughly 650,000 tons sunk, a rate the Allied shipbuilding industry was struggling to replace even before accounting for the men and cargo lost with each ship. Reconstructing the new system through mathematics and captured hardware alone had proven agonizingly slow. The Royal Navy already had a precedent for a faster route. In March 1941, a commando raid on the Lofoten Islands had captured Enigma settings from the armed trawler Krebs. 2 months later, a boarding party seized codebooks from the German weather ship München before her crew could destroy them. A third capture from the weather ship Lauenburg that June had cut Bletchley's average decryption time on the main naval network from 10 days to 6 hours almost overnight. Each of those earlier pinches, as the codebreakers called them, had proved something the war's bigger engagements rarely demonstrated so directly, that the right piece of paper, seized at the right moment by an ordinary boarding party rather than a purpose-built intelligence unit, could outweigh months of mathematics performed by some of the best minds Britain could put in one hut.
What Bletchley Park actually needed from U-559 was not a better machine, but the paper that went with one already in enemy hands. The short signal and weather cipher codebooks that told codebreakers how U-boat crews compressed and formatted their messages before those messages were ever put through the Enigma rotors at all. That need is what made the Royal Navy's standard doctrine for finishing off a damaged U-boat, previously just a matter of sinking her outright when she surfaced, suddenly worth reconsidering. On October 30th, an RAF Wellesley from 47 Squadron spotted a periscope north of the Nile Delta and dropped depth charges on the contact, and the destroyers HMS Petard, Pakenham, Hero, and Dulverton, sailing out of Port Said, took over the hunt. Standard doctrine called for a patient, repeated pattern of charges set to explode at varying depths, forcing a submerged U-boat either to stay deep and absorb the pounding, or rise and risk gunfire. Over 16 hours and more than 200 depth charges, the submerged U-559 was battered until her pressure hole cracked, and she could no longer hold a level trim underwater. When she finally broke the surface after dark, her captain ordered the crew to abandon ship, and in the panic of a rapid disorganized evacuation, the U-boat's secret documents were never destroyed, and the scuttling vents were never fully opened. Petard's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Mark Thornton, recognized immediately what an undamaged wreck, still afloat if only barely, might be worth, and ordered a boarding party over before U-559 could go down on her own, or the value of whatever she still carried was lost with her.
First Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, a 30-year-old officer from the Scottish borders, and able seaman Colin Grazier, a 22-year-old from Tamworth in the English Midlands, stripped down and swam to the crippled hull, rather than wait for a boat, climbed down through the conning tower into a compartment already taking on water, and began breaking open cabinets and safes with pistol butts, working entirely by feel and torchlight in a hull that was audibly, physically sinking around them. A third sailor, 16-year-old Nafi canteen assistant Tommy Brown, who had joined the boarding party's small boat despite having no proper role in it and despite being technically too young for the danger he was about to be in, formed the last link in the chain. Taking the books and papers Fasten and Grazier passed up through the conning tower hatch and ferrying them clear before the water swallowed the submarine entirely. If a story like this, decided entirely by two men's nerve rather than any weapon either side carried, is why you watch this channel, subscribing costs nothing and keeps the next one coming to you automatically. The submarine went down suddenly and without warning, far faster than anyone on Petard or aboard the wreck itself expected from a hull already crippled by 200 depth charges. Fasten and Grazier, still below decks passing up material, drowned. Their bodies were never recovered. Brown, still in the conning tower when the final rush of water came, was carried clear and survived, having already handed over the short signal book and the weather short cipher, documents that told Blechmatark's codebreakers precisely how U-boat operators abbreviated and formatted messages before enciphering them, closing the exact gap that had kept Shark unreadable.
6 weeks later, on December 13, 1942, Bletchley Park's Hut 8 broke back into the Shark network using material built directly on what had been recovered from U-559, ending the 10-month blackout. Fasten and Grazier were each awarded the George Cross, posthumously. Brown, not yet 17 and technically not even a combat rating, received the George Medal, one of the youngest recipients of a British Gallantry Award for actions at sea in the entire war. The Victoria Cross was considered and rejected for the two men who died, on the stated grounds that their courage, however extraordinary, had not been displayed in direct combat with an armed enemy still fighting back. The U-boat's crew had already abandoned ship by the time Fasten and Grazier went below, and the rules governing Britain's highest award for valor, written for men who charged guns or held a line, made no allowance for men who drowned retrieving paperwork rather than men who died exchanging fire. It left Britain's highest gallantry award technically unavailable to two sailors who had, in practical terms, done more lasting damage to the U-boat war than most single-ship actions of the entire conflict. The intelligence recovered from U-559 arrived just in time to matter. With Shark readable again by the end of 1942, convoy routing could once more be adjusted around known U-boat concentrations, and historians examining the resumed flow of decrypted signals have estimated that the restored intelligence helped save something in the range of 500,000 to 750,000 tons of Allied shipping in December 1942 and January 1943 alone, tonnage that would otherwise have been added to a year that had already seen some of the heaviest losses of the war, and men and cargo that would otherwise have gone down with it.
The broader code-breaking effort against U-boat Enigma resumed in earnest thanks to that single captured set of documents, remained a central pillar of Allied anti-submarine strategy for the rest of the war, feeding convoy routing decisions and hunter-killer group deployments through to Germany's surrender. None of that renewed intelligence flow depended on capturing another Enigma machine. The four-rotor machine's wiring and general mechanism were already reasonably well understood at Bletchley by late 1942, reconstructed through mathematics, captured earlier three-rotor machines, and sheer analytical persistence. What had been missing the entire 10 months was the everyday operating paperwork, the short signal tables and abbreviation books that let an analyst narrow an otherwise near-infinite search down to a workable size, and that was exactly what Fasten and Grazier had gone into a flooding submarine to retrieve. Tommy Brown did not live to see the war's end reflected on in later years. In 1945, back home in North Shields, he died trying to rescue his infant sister from a house fire, a detail that sits uneasily alongside the George Medal he had already earned at 16 for keeping his head inside a sinking submarine. Nothing about what happened aboard U-559 that night was decided by the impressive engineering on either side. The four-rotor Enigma machine itself, the product of German cryptographic confidence that had already gone unbroken for 10 months, sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean, along with the two men who died retrieving something far less glamorous than the machine: paper books, soaked and hastily grabbed, whose value neither side's hardware could match.
What decided the outcome was a boarding party willing to swim to a sinking hull rather than wait for a boat. Two men willing to keep working by torchlight inside a compartment they could hear flooding around them, and a teenager who had no business being there at all, but stayed at his post passing books upward until the water reached him too. The Enigma machine was built to be unbreakable by mathematics. It was never built to survive men who went in after the paperwork, instead of the prize everyone assumed mattered more.